Hi again. I want to talk to you today about the biblical timeline of the 70 weeks of years. The Bible tells us about the 70 weeks of years in the book of Daniel. And an angel appeared to Daniel and gave him a vision. Let's look at that real quick. Daniel chapter 9, starting at verse 24. 70 weeks are determined upon your people and upon your holy city to finish the transgression, to make an end of sins, and to make reconciliation for iniquity, and to bring in everlasting righteousness, and to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. So all this is supposed to happen within 70 weeks of years. That's 490 years. Now notice who this 490 years is for. It says in verse 24, 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city. Daniel's people was Israel and Judah. That was Daniel's people. Judah is a tribe of Israel. And Israel is divided into two branches, Israel and Judah. And of course, Jesus is from the line of the kings of Judah. So the 70 weeks are entirely for Israel and Judah and Jerusalem. That's who the 70 weeks are for. They are not for Christians. That's the first thing to notice about this in Daniel chapter 9. Now notice all the things that are going to happen within this 490 years. It says, first of all, that the 490 years are to finish transgression and to make an end of sins. Now Jesus did that when he went to the cross. He took the sins of the world and he ended transgression to the law because he canceled the law. The law was nailed to the cross with Christ, according to Colossians 2. So we know that that was done when Jesus went to the cross. That part of the 490 years, that was accomplished during Jesus' ministry. So Jesus' ministry is included in these 490 years. Jesus finished transgression, he made an end of sins, and made reconciliation for iniquity. That was what Jesus did, to bring in everlasting righteousness. And that everlasting righteousness is what you get as a result of salvation, which is the result of Jesus' ministry. And to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. So this 70 weeks of years basically includes Jesus' ministry, and it includes the day of the Lord. And we know, of course, that the day of the Lord is 3.5 years after the rapture. So this would include the time of the rapture and up to the day of the Lord, when Jesus is anointed king and reigns in Jerusalem. Then verse 25, know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem unto Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. That's 69 weeks. And the street shall be built again, and the wall even in troublous times. And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. That's right, Jesus was cut off, but not for himself, for us. He took the sins of the world. He gave his life willingly. And the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. And of course, that happened. In 70 AD, Jerusalem was destroyed and Israel was no longer a nation. 70 AD, so that's right here. And the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. They did that in 70 AD. And the end thereof shall be with a flood. And unto the end of the war, desolations are determined. Verse 27, and he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. Now the subject in verse 27, I've mentioned this before in my other videos, but the subject is Messiah. You see in verse 26, it says, after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. And the people of the prince that shall come, so it's not talking about an individual, about the Antichrist, the prince that shall come. The people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end shall come. But the he in verse 27 is still the Messiah. Verse 26, after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. Himself, the pronoun here is talking about Messiah. Verse 27, and he, that pronoun would be talking about the Messiah. And he, the Messiah, shall confirm the covenant, that's the new covenant in Jesus' blood, with many for 1 week. For 1 week. So we know that the period in which the new covenant lasts is 1 week. And we see later on that the reason for that is that the first 3.5 years are Jesus' ministry, and the last 3.5 years are the 3.5 years of the two witnesses, Israel and Judah. So the whole New Testament The whole time of the New Testament gospel takes place between the first 3.5 years in Jesus' ministry. That was the end of that first 3.5 years. Between then and when the rapture happens, which is right before the two witnesses start their ministry. That's the entire age of the Gentiles right there. So that totally makes sense. It was for exactly 1 week. Verse 27, Messiah shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. Yes, it was exactly 1 week, and that week is not over yet. And in the midst of the week, he shall cause sacrifice and oblation to cease. Now, after his 3.5 year ministry is when he died on the cross. At the end of his 3.5 year ministry, it had been 3.5 years when Jesus died on the cross. That's when he gave his life, and he caused sacrifice and oblation to cease. It was in the midst of the week, 3.5 years into that 7 years, Jesus died on the cross, and that ended the first half of the last 7 years of Daniel's 70 weeks of years. So in the midst of the week, he shall cause sacrifice and oblation to cease, and for the overspreading of abominations, he shall make it desolate. So the sacrifice and oblation ceased because Jesus died and became the sacrifice for all sin for all time. There was no longer any need for sacrifice and oblation. The fact that the Jews continued to do it in Jerusalem up until the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD, the fact that they continued to do it was an abomination. It was an abomination. It says here that he caused sacrifice and oblation to cease, and for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate. He made this sacrifice desolate. In other words, Jesus made the sacrifices that the Jews did after he died and rose again desolate. And it says even until the consummation, that's the destruction of Jerusalem in 70 AD. And that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. Who are the desolate? Those who are making the desolated sacrifices. The Jews who continued to make the sacrifices up until 70 AD when Jerusalem was destroyed. This all makes complete and total perfect sense if you look at it from the right angle. And the problem is we have a lot of people that preach a 7-year tribulation, and they preach all these things about how the Antichrist is the one who makes a covenant. No, it's not the Antichrist. The covenant is the new covenant in Jesus' blood that the Messiah made. The Messiah made that covenant during his 3.5 year ministry, and he ratified that covenant at the end of his 3.5 year ministry. And that's why it says in verse 27 that Messiah shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. He confirmed the covenant for the first 3.5 years during his ministry. He actually set it into motion at the end of his 3.5 year ministry. And then after the rapture, when the last 3.5 years start, when the Jews start their 3.5 year ministry, when the two witnesses, Israel and Judah, start their 3.5 year ministry and the Christians are gone, then that's the last 3.5 years of the 70 weeks of years. Because remember, all 70 weeks of years were for Israel and Judah and Jerusalem. That's who they're for. So we know that those last 3.5 years are just as much for Israel and Judah as the first 3.5 years were for Israel and Judah. If we look at Matthew chapter 15, we see in verse 22, a Canaanite woman from the vicinity came to him, Jesus, crying out, Lord, Son of David, have mercy on me. My daughter is suffering terribly from demon possession. And Jesus did not answer a word. So his disciples came to him and urged him, send her away, for she keeps crying after us. He answered, I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel. Notice that Jesus' ministry on the earth, his 3.5 year ministry, he was sent to the lost sheep of Israel. That's who he was sent to, was the lost sheep of Israel. His 3.5 year ministry on the earth was for the Jews. It was for Israel and Judah. And the last 3.5 years we see in Revelation, they're also for Israel and Judah. The two witnesses are Israel and Judah, and they get saved when the rapture happens, when they see their Messiah. When the rapture happens and Jesus comes with the clouds, they see their Messiah. They see him with their own eyes. And so therefore, just as it prophesied in Romans chapter 11, all Israel is saved. So the last 3.5 years are for Israel. And we see here that the first 3.5 years, Jesus' ministry, were also for Israel. Now it's important to understand the timeline of this. If we look at Daniel's 70 weeks of years, the 490 years, we know that in 457, the proclamation was made to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. So that's, and there's many people who will argue 445 BC was the date. No, that was a re-proclamation of the same proclamation that was made in 457. After the 457 proclamation, the surrounding area around Jerusalem started complaining that it was being rebuilt. Now, why would they complain about Jerusalem being rebuilt if it wasn't being rebuilt? 457 is the date that the angel was referring to when he said the 70 weeks of years, 457 BC. And we know this for certain because exactly 483 years after that was 27 AD. That's when Messiah came. That's when Jesus' ministry began. Of course, Messiah did not come when Jesus was born. Messiah came when Messiah's ministry began, which was 27 AD, which happens to be the exact year of the 483rd year. Exactly 69 weeks of years passed when Jesus' ministry began. Exactly to the year 457 BC to 27 AD. Remember, there's no year zero. So that is exactly 483 years or 69 weeks of years, just as was prophesied to us in the book of Daniel. And then his ministry was 3.5 years, bringing it to 486.5 years. And then, of course, the last 3.5 years at the end, there will be 490 years because that's 3.5 more years. And that'll be the full 70 weeks of years. So if you look at this timeline, you can see that this all makes complete and total sense. And it's all right on time. Everything is right on time to the date. 27 AD, Jesus' ministry began. It was exactly 483 years after 457 BC. That was exactly 483 years. And then the 70 weeks of years just continued right on through his ministry. It continued through the 3.5 years of Jesus' ministry. He said he was sent to the lost sheep of Israel. That's who he was sent to. So his ministry was part of the 70 weeks of years. And of course, during his ministry, he accomplished part of what was said to be done during that 70 weeks of years. He took away sin and transgression, and he made the atoning sacrifice for sin. He did that during his ministry. So that was very obviously part of the 70 weeks of years. Jesus' ministry was part of the 70 weeks of years because it's even mentioned as being part of the reason why the 70 weeks of years exist. So there's really no doubt here that this is the timeline. This is the actual timeline here. There's only 3.5 years left. And that last 3.5 years is the 3.5 years of the two witnesses' ministry. So the 70 weeks of years, the 490 years are all covered here. Because remember that Jesus being anointed king is part of the 490 years. And that happens after the last 3.5 years. So that's the 490 years, the 70 weeks of years of Daniel. And thanks for watching.